Welcome to Change Stories. Today we're diving into one of the wildest frontiers of crypto and biotech, where meme coin mechanics meet real scientific research. Our guest, Benji, is the co-founder of Pump.Science, a platform where you can literally bet on which compound will make worms live longer, and maybe even humans next. Since launching in 2024, Pump.Science has attracted over 50,000 token holders and 30,000 daily users, seeing tokens such as Reef and URO spike to 200 million market caps, funded real anti-aging experiments that live stream results from worms to flies with mice, and even had a fake token exploit that eats 17 million in minutes, showing just how wild this new frontier really is. This isn't just science funding, it's a new area of community-owned discovery, powered by crypto and curiosity. Let's break it down, and Benji, it's a pleasure to have you. How did you get started on this journey?
Yeah, thanks for the intro. Couldn't have said it better, honestly. I guess the journey started a while back. I mean, I definitely had an interest in superheroes growing up, like 5 years old, obsessed with just like every single superhero out there, you know, having like a fascination with changing ourselves to become like special, thinking that like life was more than just, you know, we were granted, but rather like finding that next evolution of ourselves. And something about that I think always attracted me from a young age. And then, got into biotech, I think just by being in San Diego, where I grew up. Huge biotech hub. Some of the biggest biotech companies in the world are, you know, down the street from where I grew up. So definitely develops like a fascination with the biotech sector pretty early. Studied that in college, just basically the intersection of biotech or of biology and computer science, basically. Kept finding parallels between the two, just in terms of understanding that like genetics is programming language of nature, and realizing that we could just basically engineer biology now that we can read and write DNA. And then, so I did a bunch of random things throughout college, entrepreneurship, investment banking, academic research, a bunch of random stuff, just like trying to search and find my way. Basically, the first job I took out of college was at a genomics company. They were doing oncology research. So what that means is like when a patient got cancer, and their cancer stopped responding to treatments, they would send it to the lab that I worked at, and we would try and basically find the reason they got cancer at the genetic level, what genes broke, became mutated, and how could we potentially give a targeted drug that targets their specific mutations. I think the important piece here is that we use one word to describe cancer, but in reality, it's many, many different diseases, and they're defined by the mutations that they have, basically the breaks in the DNA that cause them, and the therapies are getting much better in terms of pairing the right treatment to the right patient based on what specific mutations they have that cause their disease. And so I think this whole idea of personalized medicine is certainly becoming much more like common practice at this point. But I think the whole kind of like foray into crypto was just realizing that a lot of the incentives are broken in healthcare. I think you spend enough time in the healthcare industry and you realize that it's not science that's rate limiting, it's incentives. And I think for that to be the case, I was like, okay, then I guess I need to go work on an incentive problem or an incentive solution rather than try and optimize within the system that's been created. So basically was looking for different projects that were trying to merge crypto and biotech together. And none of them really seem to be working. The whole idea of storing your genomic data on-chain or owning the rights to your genetic data and being able to sell it, all that sounded great in theory, and I was super excited about that. That was kind of like where I thought the first killer use case of crypto would be to biotech, but all of those companies and projects kept on failing. And so I went to a VC fund for a bit. As cool of an experience that was, the reason it was the best was because I got to see so many different companies that were popping up, a few of which were kind of this intersection between biotech and crypto. It was a biotech fund, but decentralized science was just starting. And so, I was able to see some of the early DeSci company decks basically as they were fundraising. One of them was Vibe Bio, which is still around, and another was Molecule. And as soon as I saw the Molecule deck, I just basically went to the bottom of the ocean with all their content. And every single podcast they put out, every single article they put out, I just became obsessed and learned everything there was to learn about DeSci. And so I think it became pretty clear to me that that's where my curiosity lay, and I pursued it and left the VC fund and joined Molecule in 2022. And as you mentioned, in 2024, ended up launching Pump.Science. So that's kind of like the origin story.
That was quite of a leap of faith to completely quit what you're doing and go into this entrepreneurial route. What did you felt at that time? Did you thought that you were doing the right thing, or you felt anxious, unsure, and maybe you're like, okay, maybe I should just continue at the VC fund, more stable, as we were going into uncharted territory?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like, you don't really know the curveballs that life throws at you. And to me, VC was like the pinnacle of capitalism, right? It's like the final Pokemon, so to speak. You evolve, and then Charizard, like the venture capitalist. But as cool as it was as a job, I don't know if like I made the best venture capitalist, and I don't know if it was like my thing. I didn't think I was going to differentiate myself. And I honestly was just like pursuing curiosity, frankly. I thought this was the end game, but actually this other thing actually seems cooler. And I don't know if that was the wrong mindset of like always trying to jump at the next shiny toy, but there was just something that kind of just like vortex pulled me in. I just never felt that kind of pull from anything before. And so it was like kind of by choice, kind of just like the universe is trying to tell me something, right? I have to listen. I think in your career in life, it's like you want something from the world wants something from you. Where the magic happens is like they meet. And so it was like, geez, I wish it was more calculated than that, but it was super subjective, but very glad I did. Obviously the story's not over, but it's such a cool space to be in. Couldn't be more thankful.
Awesome. And let's take a dive into Pump.Science for those listening and hearing about this the first time in their lives. Give us a brief rundown. What is this about? What can we do on this sort of scientific experimental website?
Yeah. So most of your audience is crypto native, right? Like
our farmers out in Kentucky, we do have a very broad audience, to be honest with you.
Love it. So yeah, I mean, biotech and like healthcare industry is obviously a lot going on, a lot of different moving parts, different institutions, different players, et cetera. I think the important point that it all boils down to from the healthcare side of things is that our lifespans are not increasing here in America. So one should probably judge a society based on how long the people are living, right? Like that's an important metric, right? If people are living shorter, typically means they're worse off than if they're living longer. And especially in healthcare, like how good your healthcare system, you should probably be measured by how long the people are living, right? Of course, there's another metric, which is how well are they living, right? If they're just zombies living forever, like, is that a win? You can argue that, but for the most part, it's a pretty good indicator of how good the medical system is. Are people living longer? And here in America, at least, people are not living longer. And so this is amongst all this massive technological revolution that we've had. So technology is accelerating, lifespans are going down. Like, how the hell is that even possible? And when you start to investigate, you start to realize like the medical system, especially here in the US, is optimized to increase our lifespan. That's not how they're compensated. The compensation doesn't align with lifespan. It's just around value extraction. So it's just purely capitalist, and the incentives do not align with life extension. They align with providing you services. So if I give you a surgery, if I give you a drug, I get paid. It doesn't matter if the drug works, right? As long as you keep taking the drug, then I get paid. And so that's where the incentives lie. It's just around you being sick and kind of staying sick, right? For as long as possible, because that means I can extract more and more value out of you as the healthcare system. So I think from like the healthcare side of things, the whole idea with Pump.Science is let's see if we can make a protocol around people being healthy and provide them product that keeps them healthy rather than, trying to cure their disease or whatever. Let's see if we can make products, make supplements that actually give people time, because the existing system isn't providing that to them. That's kind of the healthcare side of things. And then comes the crypto side of things, which is right now, most of the speculation happens on meme coins, right? And for the most part, it's meme coins, which are basically tokens that aren't backed by anything. Our whole thinking is, what if we could produce these really valuable compounds that are tokenized and people can like own a piece of all of the different compounds that end up extending lifespan? Like how cool would that be? And what if we could fund all of the research on these compounds by the speculation on each of these different compounds? So by people like betting and trading, et cetera. What if all of that volume and attention could fund the research of these compounds? So I think a lot of it was inspired by some of the existing projects that had shown success in crypto. I think the two biggest inspirations, honestly, were Friendtech and Pump Fund, both leveraging bonding curves, both taking a percentage fee of those bonding curves, like trading fees, as a way to kind of like curate a new market. So Friend Tech created like a social fi market. Pump Fund created a meme coin market. What if we can create a tokenized biotech market? That was kind of the idea. And also just like wanting to build something that lasts. What are the only crypto projects that have like lasted multiple cycles? There's very few. And most of them typically have to do with like, building some sort of exchange. Right? Those are really the projects that have lasted, are the exchanges. And so just kind of realizing if you want to be around long enough to build something that lasts, you have to do something akin to being an exchange. And so we wanted to build that for these kind of tokenized compounds. That was kind of the thinking around a lot of the decisions that were made and like what guided us in this direction.
Yeah, you have called it, and I quote it, the sports betting for science. What does that mean, and why do you think is it so powerful?
Such a good question. I mean, sports betting is becoming massive, right? Like it's in the US, it's become $100 billion market. It's so big. And it brings people together. Like sports are amazing. Right? We can showcase our most athletic people and it's super entertaining to watch. And it brings communities together, etc. Sports are super powerful. But the end product is purely entertainment. I think if you can apply the same kind of entertainment layer to something that actually generates valuable products that last beyond entertainment, meaning potentially longevity supplements, like how cool would that be? If you could have an entertainment layer and a betting layer around something that actually generates valuable end products that last forever and we ingest every day, I think that that's pretty cool and something worth, gunning for. Also, like a key piece here is the entertainment funds the game. It's because people buy tickets to sports games and they bet on the sports games that funds basically the whole sports industry. What if you applied that same concept to research, right? Where like you create an entertainment layer around the research and you allow people to bet on the games, the experiments, so to speak. And what if all of that, basically betting, could fund the actual science? And so why I think it's so powerful is because it hasn't really been tried. And if it is possible and someone can execute on it, the amount of like societal impact is so insane that it's 100% worth trying, in my opinion. Because I mean, science is upstream of everything. It's like science and then everything else is downstream, right? Like what cooler way to add impact to the world than if you can kind of disrupt the entire way that people interact with science, like fund it, watch it, see the results, build off of it, own pieces of it. Like to me, it's the potentially the most impactful thing you could ever do.
How do you think we get people to start caring about aging research or their own physical health or what they're taking the way they care about trading meme coins?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I don't know if we're going to be able to like change people's values, so to speak, right? People have their values already. Trying to get them to care about something they don't already care about is tough. It's doable. We can make it fun. We can make it hopefully like help them make money. Not making that promise, but it's possible. We can definitely try do those things. But is that going to get them to care about science? We'll see. I think the more important piece is there's going to be a group of people that do value this already, right? And we need to find those people, and we need to make sure that they're excited about this and are using it. We don't get people to care about longevity, but rather performance. What I mean by this is to a lot of people, especially if you're young, dying is such like a tomorrow problem or the next day, or it's so far away that it's not a problem now and you don't value it now. Getting somebody to like care about that is just kind of a tall ask. But if you kind of reframe longevity as like performance, and now it becomes like a today problem. Like, how do I perform better today? How do I have more energy today? How do I become stronger today, fitter, smarter, faster, et cetera, today? And so I think a lot of longevity is kind of reframing as like a performance enhancement type problem. And at the end of the day, like if somebody's performing better today, they're probably going to live longer too, right? It's not necessarily one-to-one, but for the most part, that seems to be the case where, the best predictor of how long you'll live is your cardiorespiratory fitness, your VO2 max. If I go put you on a treadmill and crank it up, how much oxygen can you consume? Like how good is the engine right now? That's the best predictor of how long you'll live. So I think a big challenge for us is kind of dropping the whole longevity value proposition and saying, actually, we're looking for performance enhancing drugs. I think that will kind of bring out a whole user base of athletes and biohackers that maybe don't necessarily care all that much about longevity, but they care about being able to get the most out of their body today.
That makes sense. How do you plan like balancing the line between gamification and scientific rigor? Because at the end of the day, Pump.Science is running experiments. You have worms, flies, and mice actually in a lab, for those who don't know.
I think at the end of the day, it's like, if you want to fund science, you have to fund experiments that people are willing to fund. And so what makes them willing to fund it? Is it because they are entertaining? Is it because they value the output? Like, what is their actual motivator? And I think what we're trying to see is, if we can just make it fun, if we can gamify it, what kind of experiments can we fund? You know, there's a lot of potential experiments that we could fund where people just care about the output. They don't care what it looks like. I don't need to see it. I just want what comes out of it. But we think that we will be able to fund the most research if we can make watching and betting on the actual experiments as fun as possible. So I think for us, we have to gamify to at least prove out the system, because otherwise people will be too passive and there won't be enough urgency to fund research today. But I think your question of scientific rigor is an important one.
Like somebody, can you go through an example from start to finish of somebody coming in, like they have an idea, what kind of ideas, what's like the right kind of user profile, what's the right kind of experiment to try, and then how it works, how the bonding curve works, all the way to like the end result, how's the end result packaged and distributed?
Yeah, totally. So basically there's kind of like two different roles on the platform. One is like the dev, basically the person who submits the compound. We call them drug devs. So the drug dev, and then basically the speculators. You can call them bettors, funders. Like there's a lot of different, but basically these are people buying and selling the tokens based on which ones they think are going to be successful. If you have an idea for a supplement that you want tested, maybe you take, NMN or resveratrol or creatine, and you want to know what's its effect on all these different animals. Does it actually do anything? Like that's kind of like the first user type we're going for. Somebody who takes something and they don't even know, does it have an effect? Maybe it's hard to measure on themselves. Maybe they want to see and the cool part about doing animal testing is you can see over an animal's entire life, like, does it affect them? So it's really like somebody who is curious about a supplement, either because they take it or because they're thinking about taking it, and they want to see, does it do anything? And so they submit a compound. And what that basically means is they pay 3 SOL. That's all it costs, 3 SOL. And their compound, and maybe it's a combination. We also allow people to submit two compounds, and then we take their idea and we send it to the lab. And the first experiment that's run is we test those compounds on C. elegans, or these tiny microscopic worms, and they live for like 3 weeks, 20 days or so. And we see, does the compound extend their life? As soon as we get the data back, then they can launch the token. And that token basically represents their compound. And the reason we wait until we get the data first is because if you launch the token and now you have to wait a month to get the data back, like, it's kind of hard to keep momentum. The thinking was, once we have the data, now at least you have something to give potential token holders and token buyers that can propel this launch, right, into future experiments if the data looks good, right? So we get the data back, they launch the token on a bonding curve. We have kind of like a unique bonding curve. It's very similar fundamentally to pump funds, but we have some slight modifications. Primarily, we have a dynamic fee to prevent snipers. So we basically penalize snipers on the platform so that individuals using the UI can compete with snipers. But other than that, other than the dynamic fee, it's super similar to pump fund. And so once the drug dev, the person who had the idea, submits the compound, launches the token, then they can buy 5% of it. It goes onto the bonding curve. It graduates at 303 SOL market cap. So once it has 85 SOL in liquidity, which is identical to Pump Fund, and then it migrates to Meteora if it reaches that market cap. And same thing on Meteora, we have the dynamic fee to prevent snipers. But basically all of the volume and the trading fees, instead of going straight to Pump Fund or to nobody, we're helping to fund the research with these trading fees. And so 70% of all of the trading fees go to funding the research. And so if there's enough volume and there's enough fees, then you can pay for that next experiment. And that next experiment after worms is flies. And so once, $6,000 worth of fees have been captured, now we can fund a fly experiment. And so we take the same compound, we send it to a lab that tests them on flies. And on the flies, we don't just test their longevity, like how long they live. And their lifespans are about 90 days. But we also test them for speed. And so we have this really cool experiment where we drop the flies and then they run up the tube. And you can basically, with computer vision and AI, just measure the speed of the flies and see which one wins. So we're going to build a whole gamification layer around these fly races, and it's in development right now. It's almost done, but really, really excited about that. Basically, we're gamifying the fly races. And then also over the fly lifespan, we measure how long they live. And you see, like, does the compound extend the life of the flies? While all of that is happening, there's still trading going on, right? And again, that trading is funding that next experiment. And for us, that next experiment is mice. And so what we did for the first mouse experiment, we'll see if we run it back or we try something different next time. But what we tested with the mice for was endurance. So we basically put them on these like metal rotating rods and like accelerate the rod faster and faster and see if they can stay on. And it's basically a measure of their endurance. And we know that endurance is correlated with lifespan. And so you almost don't even need to test their full lifespan to know whether a compound is improving their health, because you can measure their health today. And so like testing mice for their lifespan would take forever. It would take like 2 years, which is basically a full crypto cycle. Like nobody's going to pay attention to that. And so we decided to test something more short-term, more entertaining, because, we can keep people's attention, for that amount of time. And it's still a super valuable data point. It's like going back to Antonio's previous question, how do you balance the gamification and the scientific validity? There's the opportunity to thread that needle. You can have both. You don't need, it's not absolutely necessary to run a full lifespan experiment to get a scientifically valid data point. And if you can make it entertaining, we think that you should pick that experiment, right? If you have a more valid experiment, but it's not entertaining at all, then nobody's going to fund it and you're dead. And so I think the goal here is to stay alive, to run experiments that people want to keep engaging in. And if you can't, then you can just fund more research to stay alive. So yeah, what you're looking at here is 3 mice, and the one on the left has been given rifampicin, the one in the middle has been given urolithin A, and the one on the right is given a control. The one on the left we called Lee-Mice Hamilton. The one in the middle is Lionel Mousy, and the one on the right is Alex Rodriguez. We named the mice. And yeah, they're basically being tested for their endurance. So we gave them compounds, so we're trying to see, does the compound help them stay on this accelerating, rotating rod longer? So that's the experiment.
How many experiments can be held concurrently, or how long until you have to contract other labs and get more people involved?
We haven't hit that capacity yet. We can probably run up to 100 worm experiments concurrently. I think up to 50 fly experiments concurrently. And we don't know what the upper limit is for the mice, but we don't see it being a limiting factor anytime soon. If it becomes limiting, then we'll 100% contract more labs. But for now, we're certainly not hitting capacity. But luckily, we'll have lead time to know, are we maxed out, and do we need to contract more labs before that happens? But that would be a great problem to have, honestly. That'd be such a good problem to have. I think we can solve that one.
Can you explain us what's going on here with the flies? I was trying to quite understand, but I feel like AI is pointing out where the flies are. And
yeah, so right now you're on, do you see how it says 1870 of 1870? This is basically the last video where only a few of the flies are still alive. Pull that all the way to the left. Pull it. Yeah, there you go. This is when all the flies were still alive. Okay, so this is the first video. It's all the flies are still alive. AI is tracking the location of each one. And it's basically predicting, are they still alive based on their movement? What is the speed? And what is the distance that they've traveled? So above the box button, you see how it's a feed, chart, and table? Click on chart. It's in the top left corner. Okay, that is the survival. They alive or dead. And what you can see is over time, the compound, it looks like there are more flies that died in the compound than the control, right? Because there are more flies alive in the control group than in the compound group. So this was the case for Rift. Rift did not extend the lifespan of the flies. It, in fact, decreased the lifespan of the flies. So that's what you're seeing here. And then I'm confused, but you should be able to see the speed and the distance as well. Do you mind scrolling up all the way to the top? Yeah, hit data on the top left. You see how it says trading and data? Yeah, there you go. And I hit the chart button, and now you see speed and distance. There you go. So what you can see here is the speed that the flies are traveling on average in each group over time. So on top in the dark blue is the control, and in the light blue is the compound. So what this tells you is that the flies who took control moved faster than the flies that took the compound. So the compound actually slowed them down, which means it's probably not healthy, right? That's what you can see from stuff to predict, are they going to die faster, right? You can see they're unhealthy. They're moving slower. So we want to figure out how to help degens predict which compounds are going to work or not and give them leading indicators like speed and distance traveled to predict which compounds are going to work, right? And be able to trade and like have alpha on the market. And so that's the big goal with all of this is like, we want to help them find leading indicators and give them alpha so that they can predict before the animals die, like, you know, which compounds work or not.
That's why the sports betting, I can bet or try to predict which one will either survive or have less life extension or not.
Exactly.
And here in this case, it's minus 27% life extension that this compound gives the flies, in a sense.
Yeah, so Rift seems to like kill the flies faster because they're living shorter.
Could we dive into the story of the compound that reached those 200 mil market cap? How was it? What happened behind it?
Yeah, of course. Basically, we launched Riff in Euro. This is Riff. The other first compound we launched is called Euro. And we launched them at Solana Breakpoint in 2024. Got a grant from the Solana Foundation to basically build this whole system. They were excited by it. And they gave us a grant. We built the prototype and we launched it at Breakpoint. And all we did was launch the worm experiments and the tokens on Pump.One, just because like we wanted to see, is anyone even remotely interested in this? Will anyone pay attention to these experiments if we put out tokens there? And both tokens hit like 1 million market cap. We streamed the data. They seemed to be somewhat interested in it. It was enough for us to further invest in building this thing. There was clearly a spark. People joined the Telegram. They were watching the worm experiments. What is this worm battle royale game? You know, like they got it. And to us, that was kind of signal that we should keep building. And so we built the whole fly experiment streaming like component. And then once we had that going and the fly experiments were live, CZ and Vitalik both went to DevCon in Bangkok. They did a DeSci day. And then there were basically videos of them holding the VitaDAO supplements and we're testing VitaDAO's compounds. And so people put it together. They're like, we're basically involved in the same projects that CZ and Vitalik are. And so we were kind of the right place, right time. We were the first real like DeSci project on Solana. And obviously the Solana meme coin craze was just like absolutely going bananas. And so we just got really lucky. And like people came to our site. I think they got it enough. They knew that there was like credible people behind the project and important KOLs. And so kind of went viral there for a second.
Oh, that's fascinating. It's also fascinating how you built all this part with flies and the experimentation part. So far, have you found any interesting compound that actually extends the life of mice or flies that we previously did not know?
Go look at urolithin. Like, it has some interesting validation data, but yeah. So you see how it's on mice? Go to flies instead on the top right-hand corner. Yeah. So go to data. Yeah. And if you go to the chart, urolithin extends the life of flies by like 20%, which is pretty cool. So it definitely works. It extended the life in the worms. It extended the life in the flies. If you go to the speed and the distance, it made them move faster and travel further.
Oh.
So like, there's something here. And the mechanism makes sense. Urolithin A works on your mitochondria. It basically forces your mitochondria to turn over and make new ones. And mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. So they basically give you more energy. Right? Urolithin A helps your body make more batteries. And you have constantly fresh batteries instead of old ones. And so clearly this has some sort of longevity benefit. We did test it on mice and it did not work on the mice. But we think that there's an issue with the mice experiment that we're running. And we need to refine that because it doesn't seem to be a scientifically valid experiment. But I think that can be increased with like a larger number of mice. We can get into the details there, but we're really excited about testing this on people and seeing this if this has a positive effect on people. There is some evidence out there that it does, but you know we want to validate that. I think an important part of crypto is like, you know, verify. And so we want to verify that this actually has like the positive effect on people that we're seeing in animals.
I do see here the human button. Does that mean we're going to have human live stream experimentations?
Yep, that's the goal. So I know it sounds crazy. But like it's actually not. Basically, what we're thinking here is people have wearables, you know, like a Whoop or a Apple Watch, etc. We measure their VO2 max. We either give them, you know, one dose of urolithin A or another, and we see how much urolithin A you take have an effect on your biometrics as measured by your wearable. Like that's the goal. And so like, that's kind of what we want to see. It's like, does it have a positive dose dependent effect? Meaning if you take more of the urolithin A up to a certain point, does it help you? Or if you take less, does it help you less? And if you don't take any, do you get no benefit? I think that's kind of what you want to see, ideally, right? We'll see if the data plays out like that. But to prove or to basically generate evidence that something works, that would be super supportive. Like if you take 1,000 milligrams of urolithin A and your VO2 max goes up by, 5-10 points, like that's insane. That means that it fucking works. Sorry. That means that it works. But if it doesn't, then like, okay, that's evidence that it doesn't work. And I think we want to see like, what are the compounds that can improve our biometrics? And that's a good predictor of, will it help us live longer? It's not perfect, but if it helps the vitals that you're measuring from a wearable, then it's probably going to help keep you healthy for longer.
Makes sense. Zooming out and going into the broader industry as a whole, the same way we had the DeFi renaissance and we took a deep dive as a whole industry into DeFi and what we could do with all these primitives, board lending, LSTs, etc. Do you think we could have, with what you're building here, the DeFi renaissance in terms of all these degen speculators coming and try experiments with compounds that we never imagined or we never had capabilities, and we could unlock something that, we didn't know this existed, and it was just found out. And can Pump.Science scale to the point of having millions of experiments going on? Or is there a bottleneck because you do need the physical labs and you do need a certain quality control in a sense, right?
It's a question of, are people willing to fund these experiments at scale? We have physical constraints. Labs only have a certain amount of equipment, but they can always order more parts, build more parts, and, grow more animals. There are physical constraints, but those can be removed if there's the resources to do it. There is a limit, but if there's more people that want to, fund this research, then like we can remove those barriers. Of course, it'll take time, but like it's doable. I think the question of, can we find a new molecule here that, changes the world? Like that's the whole point of it. That's literally why we're here. And I think it's only limited by people's imaginations and their desire to fund something larger than meme coins, right? And like, fund this specifically. But it's on us to make a system that works, that they trust, that they're excited about, that's fun. And if we can do all of those things, like, hopefully people are going to help create the DeFi renaissance. It doesn't happen on its own. Like it has to be a collective effort. And if this is something that's exciting to people, and hopefully it is, then we'll see a freaking huge renaissance of compounds getting submitted, experiments getting run, getting tested and, discovering new compounds that extend life that we can all take and all, be healthier and live longer. So, people criticize the utility of crypto all the time. Like, what if we could all point to and say, like, look what, this group of degenerates just found. They found this compound that, like, extends life, and now, like, everybody takes it. I think that would be pretty cool.
Are you worried at a certain part people could come here and treat this just like a casino instead of real research, and things could get mixed?
I always ask this question, what is the difference between a gambler and an investor? What's your answer?
It depends. There's different types of investors, I guess.
Yeah. I think the difference is the outcome. Like, do you win or not? Right? Like the difference between a gambler and investor is the result. Do you keep losing or do you keep winning? And so you can frame it as a casino. You could frame it as like value creation. To me, meme coins are pure gambling because there is no output other than like a laugh and a community, right? But here you can frame it as a casino, sure, but it's producing all the super valuable data and potentially like novel compounds that end up getting taken to market and creating real product value. And it is our goal to bring some of that product value, if generated, back to the token holders as a reward for finding something novel and getting it through. So we're definitely trying to make it seem more utility than meme gambling, but people perceive the crypto market as a casino, and all we can do is try and build projects with utility.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are you, in terms of trading, are you planning on doing perps margin? How far do you think you can push, or what's the roadmap?
I think anything you've seen in DeFi, you could potentially imagine with these tokens. And so one thing we've tried is prediction markets. So kind of like poly market where you predict, which president's going to win. We've created prediction markets for which mice will win. a race. And honestly, people didn't like it that much. There wasn't very much volume. But what we're really excited about is testing out margin trading, because it will fund more research, because it'll generate more volume, and it will allow people who otherwise don't have enough money to move the market to be able to do so. If you have leverage, of course, you can move the markets more. And so we're developing these fly racing interface and experience where people will be able to leverage trade on whether a compound will, increase the speed of the flies or not. And so we want this to be something that people get excited about. They get excited about an experiment getting run because, there's a ton of volume around it and there's a lot of volatility, and they can come in and take leverage and, bet, one way versus the other on, whether a compound will work, whether an experiment will, result in something, and be a degen around the science. To me, that's super exciting. I think that it'll be much more fun than meme coins because it's real world, right? There's a story there, and it affects the physical world. And so I think it'll be much more fun, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, that's the idea. Build more and more DeFi tooling around the tokens that represent the different compounds and experiments to make it more fun and to create a whole financial layer for science that's outside of the existing scientific financial system.
What does the ownership of IP look like in this model? Can a trader who bought a meme token actually own a piece of biotech here?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And this is kind of a nuanced piece here, but there's only ever one IP owner. And that owner, in our case, is the inventor, the drug dev. The person who submits the compound and says, this is my idea, I want to get it funded, they are the IP owner. But what they are decentralizing and what the tokens represent is governance over that IP. So, if there are any sort of rewards or if there's any sort of important decisions that need to be making around that IP, then the token holders have a say and can be rewarded. There's only ever one owner, but there's lots of people that it's kind of you live in a country and you don't own the country, but you have a vote on the country. And if they strike oil in your country, then you get the benefit of it, but you don't own the country that you live in. You just vote in it, and maybe you pay taxes, maybe you get rewards, and you're a part of it, but you don't necessarily own it. So they do essentially, they do hold IP rights. They do own IP rights, which is crazy. But yeah, that's kind of an important piece of the DeSci stack that's been built at Molecule, is enabling these tokens to hold real world IP rights. Although the tokens that are launched on Pump.Science look like meme coins and they have meme coin tokenomics, by holding one of those tokens, you hold IP rights in the compounds that are getting launched. And it's kind of abstracted away from the user because it doesn't really, matter to most people. They just want to, play the game. But in reality, if that compound gets monetized, the token holders can be rewarded.
Are you also planning on launching a token to the ecosystem of Pump.Science? Or will be similar in a way as Pump.Fund that just was purely equity and it's just the tokens that launched there?
It's a good question. I don't think we have a great answer other than our whole community wants us to launch a platform token. I think there's a lot of benefits in launching a platform token because you can attract capital that isn't going to degen on compounds and whether they extend life. There's only so many people that are going to do that. And how do you create a token for people that are I'm not going to bet on these individual compounds, but I like the idea. I like the platform and I want to support the research that's being funded here. And so giving them a vehicle to do it with a platform token is potentially wise because you can just bring more money in for the research, right? But at the same time, now you're beholden to another token and people could be actually betting on which compounds will work. And now they're just well, I'm just going to buy the platform token and I'm done. So it can also take away liquidity from where ideally it would go, which is on the individual compounds, right? And speculating on which ones will extend life. Unless there are people or AI agents or somebody trading those tokens, the whole system doesn't work. And so there are definitely pros and cons to launching a platform token. I think we're keeping the option open, but we don't have immediate plans to. We're focused on building the product at the moment.
Building a pipeline from ideas to fully fledged biotech companies.
Yeah, it's a question of what does a company even really mean? The reason you create a company is to raise VC funding for the most part, and the LLC structure isolate liability, but it's really around fundraising. If we have fundraising around just the compound, you kind of don't really need the company, right? You just have the IP becomes the funding layer, right? And so in a way, yes, we're just creating like single asset biotech companies, but we're also not selling equity. Like we're selling tokenized IP rights, right? And you can still fundraise for the research. You can still commercialize the compound, but you don't need a company to do that. You can create this kind of like tokenized ecosystem where you just fundraise around the IP, and you can take a compound all the way from idea to commercialization without a company and without venture capital investors. And so in a way, we are taking compounds from idea to biotech company, but in another way, we're just getting rid of the biotech company altogether.
In the same way that sort of crypto came in and VCs could no longer come into rounds because projects were like, or the market was saying like, we want tokens to be fully in the market instead of being locked. And we went through that phase in the cycle. And yeah, it's quite interesting how crypto really puts VCs or traditional industries out of their own market.
You are the VC now. You're the biotech founder now, and you're the VC now.
Yeah, and how do you see Pump.Science in terms of fitting into the broader molecule ecosystem?
So where Pump.Science sits and where Molecule sits is we're just a user of their technology. They've built, Molecule's built a super powerful technology to tokenize intellectual property for biotech assets. We're just a specific use case of that. If you think about biotech, there's so many different areas of research, right? There's cancer research, there's heart disease, right? There's every single disease has a certain area of research associated with it, and that could be tokenized, and you could use the molecule IP stack for. We're just starting with one, which is just this longevity, performance enhancing kind of pipeline, and those types of assets, which right now we're developing supplements. But the search space is super large. The types of, the verticals you go into are enormous. We're just one specific application. And we're the most bullish on this application. We think it has the best chance of succeeding. And that's why we're building it. But at the end of the day, it's just one kind of shot on target that potentially many can use Molecule's IP stack.
Well, and what do you see that's next for Pump.Science? Are we going behind longevity, brain health, fertility, any other wild experiments?
Yeah, I mean, anything people want to fund. Like, I'm really excited about nootropics, like brain health, because a lot of people take nootropics. I certainly take my fair share. But yeah, I think that brain health is also something that people value today, right? Like, if I have brain fog today, or if I didn't have caffeine, like, I feel it. And it really impacts conscious life, right? And so there's like the whole like physical body stuff, and then there's like the mental. And to me, nootropics are basically the kind of mental analog for performance enhancement. And I think everyone's trying to get like an edge on each other. People want to be faster than the next person. Like, they're very competitive on that angle. People want to be able to think faster and be more creative than the next person. Like, everyone's trying to get an edge. And to me, nootropics are also just that way for you to get the edge, right? And just like be a little bit smarter and a little bit faster and more creative than the next person. And, we can help people find their edge, showing which compounds give them that edge, whether it's their physical health or their mental health, their brain health. I think that's the next big application of this, is you have the mental and the physical. And so we're starting with the physical, and then I think we do the mental next. And we'll see where we go from there. Fertility, like synthetic biology. Again, it can explode. There's so many different areas of research. And the question is, where is there demand? Like, what do people actually care about enough to make this thing sustainable? And so we're going to start with those, and then hopefully branch out from there.
That really sounds fascinating. I really wonder where this industry is going to go next. And I want to ask you if you could put your VC hat back on. DeFi seems to be one of the most undervalued sub-niches within crypto, and it's been around for more than 2 years. What do you think that has happened for it just not to have more traction so far? We've seen other narratives like DePIN, DeFi, or like AI, let's say, exploding because of mainstream or certain cycles. But what are we missing here, especially in a sub-niche where there's so much utility and fixes real world use cases?
Yeah, such a good question. And I would love to hear your answer, but I certainly have my own, which is, and it's funny that you bring up like the utility piece. I think you actually need to come back to the casino, right? Let's come back to the casino for a second. Why do people use crypto for the most part? Most users are coming to gamble, right? Just the reality, right? They want to make money. Science is expensive. DePIN, physical infrastructure, is expensive. Every dollar you take out of the casino is a dollar that could go into somebody, a gambler's pocket, right? So you're taking it out of the market. And so then you're hurting the odds of a gambler, right? Whereas meme coins have basically, 49% odds of winning. If you go on pump fund and they charge you 1%, that becomes your expected value. It's $1 minus 1%, 99 cents on the dollar. Pretty good odds, right? But with DPIN and DeSci and like these expensive applications, you're just taking money out of the market. And so I think that becomes less attractive to the average crypto trader. So the question becomes, can you bring in new liquidity to basically offset the cost to bring in more value than meme coins? What I mean is your expected value of trading meme coins is basically $1 minus the transaction fees. We'll call it 1%, 99 cents on the dollar. If DeSci costs 5 cents on the dollar per every dollar that goes in, but it makes 10 cents on the dollar because it can produce a product that generates revenue, and that revenue can go back to the token holders. Now you can have a positive expected value as a trader, and a gambler. So your chance of winning shift from 49% to 2%. That's where we have to get in order for these other areas of crypto that are more interesting, and have more utility to actually catch hold, is when they actually bring more value back to the average trader. And until that happens, meme coins will win because they are the best odds at the casino.
Makes sense and keeps the liquidity in circulation. But I do think it's also about that short-term dopamine hit that it gives a lot of traders, and it keeps that in, because it would come years or months after, whoa, these produce actual real-world case solutions and it solves a problem. It's like a real company that stays in the market for 10, 20 years. Like it solves a problem, but does the user demand that, or the current crypto user? Probably not. They just look for that short-term dopamine hit of, wow, meme coin exploded in price. And I do think finding this middle ground can be quite challenging, but yeah, ultimately, I think is what the industry needs, because Pump.Fund was extremely extractive as in nature and just took a lot of value. And our industry as a whole, on the outside to the outside world, is pictured as, what the is going on with these crypto people? Yeah. So really curious to see where this is going to go.
Totally. I think it's very easy to look at Pump Fund and say they're extractive, right? And they took out so much value, and they did. But every single transaction there was consensual, right? Every time someone went to Pump Fund and placed a trade, nobody was forcing them to. They built the most addictive app in crypto, and you got to give it up to them, right? Because look, they're not forcing anybody. It's a free market, and people keep going back, which means from the outside, yes, maybe they're extractive. They made a lot of money, if you want to call that extractive. People paid them a lot of money, but also they must have created some value, right? Because people kept going back. And so I think ultimately it's very easy to look at something like Pump Fund and say they're extractors. But in reality, they just built what the people wanted. And you can't blame them for that. Nor do I think you should criticize them for that. They built what the people wanted. And the people rewarded them with a lot. And so they deserve it. And so, look, I showed my dad Pump Fund, and he holds Solana, and he's like, sell my Solana. I can't believe this is the most, this is the app with the biggest usage on this network. But at the end of the day, it's crypto's about engineering the value layer. And to your point, that will get used for the biggest dopamine use cases first. With the internet, it was porn, the biggest dopamine hit. And it was porn at the beginning, and then it evolved into Amazon and PayPal and all these really cool utility applications. But the first applications, you're right, were max dopamine. And I think meme coins are kind of the porn of value. It's just that max dopamine hit, and it just takes time to be able to build infrastructure and utility that lasts multiple cycles and creates value over multiple cycles. And we'll see if Pump Fund can stick around, but I think they will. I think that makes a lot of sense. And we're very early days, and maybe Pump.Science will be the Amazons of crypto later on. But we do need the Pump.Fund, which are the pioneers of this whole system and mechanics. And I do think ultimately the value there was the entertainment, right? They provided entertainment to a lot of people that were looking for something different. Benji, what is the best form for people to follow your work, to get in touch? We're on Twitter, Pump.Science. We're on Telegram, Pump.Science. Look, man, you must be tired. 4 a.m., your brain's working pretty well. I must say, I think your brain's working better at 4 a.m. than mine's working right now at 6 p.m.
Neurotropics.
It's really working.
But
While you're having